in
Sure.
a
Just remember,
terrible way.
Colombia is not Venezuela. Venezuela has one major city and then a lot of areas that kind of cling on. There are three major cities that are broadly disconnected in Colombia. So even if you change the presidency, it's not like all those regional power centers are just going to snap to. And that
Yes.
whenever someone's going to make a judgment, they're coming from their own moral code and their own normative view of what should happen.
Hmm.
And I don't have a lever to affect that. So if people
Hmm.
ask me, I will, of course, tell them, but they might not be aiming for the same future that I am.
Well,
Let's see. If I was going to choose one thing to do different, I would say that back during the Clinton and the W. Bush administrations, we should have spent about 20 times as much as we did on researching new green techs. Here we are in 2022. There's a broad assessment that the climate is an issue, and we have yet to develop a good technology for mass application that can actually address the problem. Today's solar and wind doesn't work on 80% of the world's surface, and we still don't have a good grid battery. And until we have that, everything else is just rearranging chairs. Baby boomers. There's so many things the baby boomers did wrong. It's really difficult to know where to start. However, you can link into immigration. Um, Way back when, under Jimmy Carter, which is generally not considered one of our more successful presidents, the series of hurricanes hit Central America, and the Department of Immigration went down into Central America to hand out worker permits. And the idea is if you keep your nose clean, you can work, and after a certain amount of time, you can apply for an extension. You can get a ticket home, or you can get on the path to citizenship. And it was the only time in our history that we regularized the illegal immigration flows. And so we actually knew the size of the problem. If we had done something like that in the early 2000s, we would have already, from the additional tax inflows, paid for the entirety of the baby boomer retirement. I'm not nearly as concerned. Now, let me start by saying I'm a fiscal conservative. So the idea of what I'm going to say, it kind of makes my stomach turn, but it really doesn't matter, or at least not yet. Let me put that from 3 points of view. Number one, if we issue new debt of $850 billion to $900 billion a year, that is about the same as our long-term GDP growth average. So that's kind of
mhm.
the floor that we can do without increasing the relative debt load. So that's kind of our
Yep.
bare minimum. Number two, the United States dollar is the sole global currency. And one of the things that the Ukraine war has shown us is that there are absolutely no pretenders to the throne. Right, sure. I mean,
Okay.
our long-term growth rate is 2.5 to 3%.
Yep.
So with our GDP in its current size, that means we can deficit spend the entire defense budget right now.
Hmm.
Just to give you an
Yeah.
idea of
I just
scale.
want to, yeah, okay. I thought that's what you were saying. I wanted to clarify for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Second, when you're the global currency, a lot of the rules don't apply, and that is totally not fair, but it is still totally true. Most countries, most trade use the US dollar as the lubricant of exchange, whether in trade or in their own internal systems. Remember, the US dollar is the second most used currency in every country in the world, except for in the countries where it's the number one used currency. It is the primary store of value, and more store of value is held outside of the United States than within, which means we're in
Hmm.
this weird little system where we can print currency and they have to suck it up. Uh, it's rude. It's not fair. It's still true. Oh, and I totally get it. And then we get to the third thing. Fiat's the new norm. We used to have asset-backed currencies, backed by gold or copper, whatever it happened to be. And what people forget about the good old days is they weren't all that good old. You would have one of those that worked in the world because it would attract other people because they wanted that asset-backed nature. And the more successful it was, the more of the gold or the copper that you needed to back it, which meant that every country that had a successful asset-backed currency had to physically expand and go to war for more assets. And that ultimately undid all of them. So fiat is a bad idea for secondary currency, but it's a great idea for a primary one because you're no longer faced that restriction.
Hmm.
So we're now in this weird, strange world where the less involved the United States is, the more stable its currency is because it's not involved in the trading matrix. So countries that are not even trading with the United States now see the US dollar as really their only option, even as the United States kind of melts away from the international scene. And when that's the environment, inflating the value of the currency, or I'm sorry, inflating the supply of the currency by 10% a year, it's really not that big of a deal. that I work with, and most of my business is from consulting for firms now, is their primary concern is labor. Mexican labor has stopped coming to the United States. Inward migration from Mexico has been negative for 12 of the last 13 years now.
Right.
And there is a particular shortage in the sorts of jobs that the baby boomers were known for. They were kind of our last broad cadre employment block, where they didn't just do white collar, they did blue collar, they did the trades, they did agriculture. Anything that was part of that broad spectrum that wasn't just top management, we have a shortage of now. And we're going to have a shortage of for at least the next 25 years.
Yeah.
So anything you can do to bring businesses into schools earlier in the process, grade school I'm talking, in order to build out those skill sets and make kids aware that there are job opportunities besides designing video games,
right,
would be great. And in the states and the cities that have done this, it's been a runaway success, but we need an order of magnitude bigger at least. That's absolutely the single biggest limiting factor we are facing for the United States build out. Because remember, we're losing our largest generation. We're being replaced by the Zoomers, who are our smallest ever generation. At the same time, we need to roughly double the size of the industrial plant to manufacture back. That takes people. That takes people with skill sets that we are not particularly rich with at the moment. And if we can solve that, everything else is so much easier. And it's not, it doesn't look like it did in the 80s. I mean, that's all computerized now. So, I mean, everything requires a degree of coding for a lot of these jobs. I mean, up to and including people who come and do project work at your house. About half of, there is a section in the industrial commodities chapter on it briefly, which explains why I didn't do it much elsewhere. Half of the world's uranium comes from Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan is sandwiched between Russia and China. And to think that it's going to be part of any trading system in the future is a reach. And then, of course, the second largest supplier is Russia proper. So you can have nuclear as part of the math in either Russia or China, but that's about it. Any place else, you're going to have to do some serious sourcing of your own stuff. Australia is going to provide some options. They're building out as quickly as they can, but for them to just sustain the reactors that are in generation right now, they would have to expand their output by a factor of 15. That's not going to happen. So there will be some specific countries that might be able to have a few reactors. But in the case of the United States, ours are 50 years old. They need to be decommissioned. New ones, I think, are a great idea, but there's a materials issue, there's an experience issue, there's a time issue, there's a regulatory issue, and they're just so much better, lower hanging fruit than nuclear, unfortunately, at this time.